On this Friday night, Ferry fire. The alarming moments on the way to Prince Edward Island. Mounting casualties of a healthcare crisis.
We have seen no sense of urgency from the provincial government.
Another helpless person dies waiting for medical attention, fighting to protect young athletes.
How many more 7-year-old children need to be abused?
The amplifying calls to investigate Gymnastics Canada. And a grueling life in the fast lane. The runner who bounced back to break into the record books.
Global National with Farah Nasser. Reporting tonight, Neetu Garcha.
Good evening and thanks for joining us. Another day and we're learning of yet another healthcare tragedy. With healthcare resources pushed past the breaking point, this summer is becoming a grim ritual of deaths that have traditionally been considered avoidable at Canadian hospitals. As Ross Lord explains in tonight's top story, making matters worse, those who speak out are sometimes being shouted down by government and healthcare authorities.
At Canada's overcrowded and understaffed emergency departments, tragedy is becoming routine. An elderly woman at Lionsgate Hospital in North Vancouver died after lying on a stretcher in the emergency waiting room for 2 days.
The nurses that work at Lionsgate are absolutely devastated about the incident that happened last Sunday. And they have been fearful that such an incident was going to happen for months and months.
The latest in a growing series of deaths of people awaiting care in various parts of Canada.
I think there's going to be, unfortunately, more of these stories. There's certainly nothing that's happening right now that's going to resolve this problem in the next few weeks or months, from what I'm seeing.
Among the challenges, getting everyone in healthcare to work together.
We are alarmed that to date we have seen no sense of urgency from the provincial government.
At a news conference Thursday, labour unions and Frontline Ontario nurses pleaded for more support.
It's also not rare for us to be called on our way home to come back to the hospital after working an 8 or 12-hour shift, or be asked to short shift, meaning finishing working at 11:30 p.m. and come back to work at 7:30 a.m. because the burnt-out nurse couldn't show up.
A statement from the Ontario Hospital Association said it deeply values the hard work and dedication of healthcare workers and is working to make sure there's as much support as possible. The OHA said a Team Ontario approach is critical and that this commitment to common cause was not demonstrated by labour unions at their news conference. Now the gloves are coming off. The Service Employees Union accuses the Hospital Association of hiding behind hollow talking points instead of making a commitment to solutions. It says the lack of transparency as emergency rooms close is a dereliction of duty from hospital executives. Using adversarial language against people who call out life-threatening deficiencies can make the healthcare crisis even worse, according to the CMA.
We can only feel like we're on the same team when our lived experience daily is being recognized and acknowledged, and people feel that there's transparency and accountability for what's going on in the system. And I think if we can move towards that.
But first, she says, things are likely to get even worse in a crisis everyone in healthcare saw coming, made worse by the pandemic, with no obvious end in sight. Ross Lord, Global News.
In the U.S., the January 6th hearings wrapped up for the summer with another day of jaw-dropping testimony and video evidence.
I don't want to say the election's over. I just want to say Congress has certified the results without saying the election's over, okay?
These outtakes of Donald Trump's video message to his supporters on the night of the riot, a key piece of evidence. They show how Trump wanted to call the Capitol rioters patriots and was still refusing to concede he lost the election. Jackson Proskow has more on Thursday's explosive testimony and what's ahead when the committee resumes its hearings in September.
Fully aware his supporters were attacking the Capitol, President Donald Trump sat in his private dining room and watched it all unfold on TV.
President Trump did not fail to act during the 187 minutes between leaving the ellipse and telling the mob to go home. He chose not to act.
The January 6th committee heard how Trump made no calls to the military or police or anyone else for help for more than 3 hours, and instead sent a tweet attacking Vice President Mike Pence, who quickly became the target of the enraged mob.
Looked like fuel being poured on the fire.
If we lose, any more time, we may lose the ability to, to continue. And we have to continue to fight.
The January 6th committee heard how Trump made no calls to the military or police or anyone else for help for more than 3 hours, and instead sent a tweet attacking Vice President Mike Pence, who quickly became the target of the enraged mob.
If we lose, any more time, we may to leave. They are on the second floor, moving in now.
Recordings of Secret Service radio chatter show the panicked effort to protect the vice president as the crowd closed in.
You got smoke downstairs, set by unknown smoke set downstairs.
An unidentified witness testified that agents openly feared for their lives.
I'm like talking about it, but that there were calls to say goodbye to family members, so on and so forth. It was getting, for whatever the reason was on the ground, the VP detail thought that this was about to get very ugly.
Trump ally Senator Josh Hawley gave a fist pump to the crowd before the riot, but was later seen running away in new video released by the committee.
I'm here delivering the president's message.
Even more startling, video showing the rioters hung on every word from the president that day, including his eventual call to go home.
So go home. We love you. You're very special.
He says go home. He says go home.
The committee suggests both action and inaction speak to Trump's intent, and they promise there's still much more to come.
Doors have opened, new subpoenas have been issued, and the dam has begun to break.
The hearings are expected to resume in September, with the committee suggesting there are now multiple new avenues for investigation. At the same time, there's increasing scrutiny on the Justice Department as it weighs whether former President Trump should face charges. Neithu?
Jackson Proskow in Washington. Thanks, Jackson. And one more note on this. Donald Trump's former advisor, Steve Bannon, has been found guilty of contempt of Congress. A jury found Bannon guilty of 2 misdemeanor counts for refusing to provide testimony or documents to the House committee investigating January 6th. Each count is punishable by anywhere from 30 days to 1 year behind bars, or fines ranging from $100,000 to $100,000. Hockey Canada has launched an investigation into allegations of a group sexual assault involving members of the 2003 World Junior team. In a written statement, Hockey Canada says upon learning of the allegations, it immediately contacted the Halifax Regional Police, who say an investigation has now been started. The 2003 World Junior Championship was hosted in Halifax, and Canada's team included multiple players who went on to NHL careers. Hockey Canada says it is committed to bringing an end to the culture of silence in hockey and is calling for anyone with knowledge of this incident to contact police. 1 month after the federal government froze its funding for Hockey Canada, it has now done the same for Gymnastics Canada. Ottawa says the organization needs to commit to an independent investigation into abuse allegations before it can access the money. At the same time, the organization's own athletes are also escalating their calls for action. David Akin explains.
The open letter from the group calling themselves Gymnasts for Change has 500 signatures.
A lot of these signatures have come with stories of abuse.
One catalyst for the letter was the arrest of a 33-year-old male gymnastics instructor in Lethbridge, charged with the sexual assault of a 7-year-old girl.
How many more 7-year-old children need to be abused before we realize that we need to do something immediately? We have been calling since March for an independent investigation into the toxic culture of Gymnastics Canada, and we have been ignored.
That independent third party is supposed to be the Office of the Commissioner of Sports Integrity. That's a new federal agency created to take on complaints from athletes who have concerns about their sports federation's ability to investigate themselves. But until sports federations register with this new commissioner, that commissioner has no authority to investigate the very complaints the gymnasts are making. And that's why Ottawa suspended the $3 million in federal funding Gymnastics Canada receives every year to compel it to register so that the commissioner has the authority to investigate.
And I just think we need to start diffusing the power at the top, with these organizations, again, that have sort of been doing all of this without any oversight.
Yes, we're demanding that they sign on to the Organization for Integrity in Sports as a condition to flow funding. But they shouldn't be worried about satisfying the government. They should be worried about satisfying parents across the country, that they're keeping their kids safe.
Even still, some worry the new Sport Integrity Commissioner is still too close to the national sports federations.
I don't trust it because it's not completely independent. When looking at abuse, it needs to be completely independent and completely removed from the sport organizations.
And even so, more may be required.
I think ultimately I do think there needs to be a body that is created by athletes for athletes that start to, navigate this system with our best interest in mind.
As for Gymnastics Canada, it said in a statement it is working, quote, tirelessly to complete its agreement with the Sports Integrity Commissioner. David Akin, Global News, Ottawa.
A frightening experience for passengers on a ferry sailing from Nova Scotia to Prince Edward Island after a fire broke out on board and they had to abandon ship. 182 passengers and 18 crew were on the Northumberland ferry when the fire erupted in the engine room at around 11:15 this morning, before the ship ran aground. As Alicia Drouse reports, it was all hands on deck to get everyone off the ferry quickly and safely.
It's an unusual way to deboard a ferry, but passengers aboard the Northumberland ferry traveling from Nova Scotia to Prince Edward Island Friday morning had to slide to safety after a fire broke out on board. The ferry departed Caribou, Nova Scotia at 10 a.m. Friday morning. It was scheduled to arrive in PEI at 11:45. It was just minutes from docking when something went wrong.
First indication was they just put these alarms off, which were quite loud, but that they send an alarm different times when you're getting off the boat, so not everybody knew what it was right away. And then probably 5 minutes later, through the alarm, someone got on and announced that there was a fire in the engine room.
The fire in the engine room prompted an evacuation from the boat. Passengers were asked to line up on the deck on the opposite side of the ship from the engine room and were all given life jackets.
The smoke started to gather a bit. And there were a few people that were a little paranoid. I spoke with one lady who had been through a fire at home, and she was traumatized. But most people dealt with it pretty much in stride.
Passengers say the rescue went smoothly, thanking crew for their quick action and all those nearby who came to help.
The lobster boat there first, and then the Coast Guard came in. There was a pleasure yacht from the States came over, and they ferried people ashore as well.
I'm really glad it didn't happen in the middle of the strait. We would have had a different story completely.
All 182 passengers and 18 crew members disembarked with no injuries. And as a precaution, Northumberland Ferry suspended the remaining trips for the day. On Thursday, the 10 a.m. ferry departure from Nova Scotia was canceled due to technical issues. Northumberland Ferries posted to Facebook after saying those issues were resolved. The company did not respond to inquiries about whether or not those technical issues had any relation to the fire on Friday. Alicia Drouse, Global News.
Rogers has a new chief technology officer in the wake of that huge service outage which offlined the company's network, impacting millions of customers across Canada. The telecom giant promised to make investments to avoid a repeat of the network-wide outage and has confirmed staffer Jorge Fernandez is stepping down from his role of chief technology and information officer effective immediately. He will now be replaced by Ron McKenzie, previously the president of Rogers for Business, who also spent 10 years with Shaw Communications. On Monday, McKenzie and 2 other Rogers executives will be testifying about the outage on Parliament Hill. It is a virus that hasn't been detected in the U.S. in years. Coming up, the case that has health officials on alert. Police in Brazil say at least 18 people were killed during a raid in Rio de Janeiro, which targeted a criminal gang in one of the city's largest favelas. Residents chanted for justice as they carried some of the dead and injured out of the favela following the police raid. 16 of the victims are said to be suspected criminals, while a police officer and a bystander were the other 2. Officials say some 400 officers took part in the operation. Hundreds of Sri Lankan security forces moved in on protesters in Colombo early this morning as they worked to clear demonstrators that have been camped out in the nation's capital for weeks. Police described it as a special operation to take back control of the area occupied by Sri Lankans enraged with the country's economic collapse. The raid came just hours before the island nation's new president swore in a fresh cabinet. For the first time in nearly a decade, polio has been detected in the U.S. New York health officials say an unvaccinated adult tested positive for the disease earlier this week, but is no longer contagious. Polio was one of the most feared diseases in the late 1940s, with annual outbreaks causing thousands of cases of paralysis, many of them in kids. A mass vaccination campaign that started in 1955 led to the U.S. being declared polio-free in 1979. A judge has ruled Prince Harry can take the British government to court over his security arrangements in the UK. Prince Harry and his wife Meghan Markle, the Duke and Duchess of Sussex, lost their publicly funded police protection when the couple stepped down from royal duties and moved to the U.S. back in 2020. Prince Harry wants to pay for his own security when his family returns to the UK and is challenging the government's decision not to allow that. Homecoming mission. Ahead, how some Canadian veterans banded together to help a comrade badly injured in Ukraine. At least 3 bodies have been recovered from the rubble of a school in the eastern Ukrainian city of Kramatorsk. Local officials blame Russian shelling, which also damaged more than 80 residential buildings in the area. Moscow says it targeted the school because it was being used as a base for Ukrainian troops and claims the strike killed more than 300 soldiers. Neither claim has been independently verified. A Canadian badly wounded while serving with the Ukrainian Armed Forces is recovering in an Ottawa hospital tonight. The retired veteran, who served 3 decades with the Canadian Forces, was part of the International Legion, a contingent of global troops helping to fight Russian forces in Ukraine. Jeff Semple has his remarkable rescue story in this Global News exclusive.
Almost every day for 2 months, Erica received a text message that her dear friend JT was okay.
I didn't know when he left for Ukraine if I ever would see him again.
In March, the 50-year-old recently retired Canadian veteran traveled to Ukraine to join the fight. A couple of months later, his truck hit an anti-tank mine. JT was rushed to hospital, clinging to life.
I was really scared.
Erica spent weeks trying to arrange his rescue, but was told the Canadian government couldn't help, and a private air evacuation was too expensive. So she called a lifeline.
He's one of us. I mean, you know, no man left behind.
This veteran served in the same brigade as JT in Kandahar. He and others have spent the past year rescuing refugees from Afghanistan and Ukraine. Then in May, they learned one of their own was in trouble. JT was badly injured in hospital, close to the front line and far from any border.
You've got a wounded guy in Ukraine. There's no government support available. So how do you get somebody back from a situation like that? This really was a Canadian team effort.
Over several weeks, the group of veterans and health workers came up with a plan. JT was transferred between 6 different Ukrainian hospitals before finally catching a flight out of Warsaw. And last week, he touched down here in Toronto.
It was very emotional, super amazing to get to see him again. It was an enormous sense of relief.
Global News spoke to JT, whose last name we're withholding, by phone from his hospital bed.
It's impossible for me to not get emotional because, you know, if I talk about alone, the amount of people that have come forward to assist me.
He suffered a broken neck, fractured ribs, burns, a concussion, and nerve damage. But incredibly, he says, he doesn't regret his decision to go.
I saw families being torn apart. You know, you want to get out there and help because I have the ability to do so. It's one mind that doesn't find a child or a family or like I'm good.
Now on a long road to recovery, but grateful to be alive. Jeff Semple, Global News, Toronto.
Ukraine and Russia have signed separate agreements with Turkey and the UN, which will allow Kyiv to resume exports of grain through the Black Sea. The deal was finalized in Istanbul today, putting an end to the wartime standoff that heightened the possibilities of an international food crisis. Ukraine says it has around $10 billion worth of grain available for sale in the wake of the agreements. Dashing into history. Next, the record one cross-country runner just shattered. 67 days after he set off from St. John's, ultra runner Dave Proctor has finished his cross-country trek, breaking the Trans-Canadian speed record. The 41-year-old from Okotoks, Alberta, landed at mile 0 in Victoria at the foot of the Terry Fox statue. Proctor tried to stick to the Fox's Marathon of Hope route as he made his way across Canada. He averaged more than 100 kilometers per day and burned through 12 pairs of shoes. He was emotional as he spoke about how grateful he was to complete the run.
I've just seen the most beautiful country in the world, and I suggest every Canadian to go do the very same thing. And don't run it, get in a vehicle and drive it, or go see a part of the country you haven't seen. But I just feel like if I could do that, I can do bloody well anything.
This was Proctor's second attempt at beating the record. His first in 2018 was cut short because of a back injury. And despite eating a treat from every bakery across Canada, he still lost about 18 pounds. And that is Global National for this Friday night. I'm Neetu Garcha. Tonight's Your Canada is this grain elevator in Battleford, Saskatchewan. Thanks for watching. Tracy Tong will be at the anchor desk tomorrow, and I'll see you again on Monday from Edmonton for our special coverage of the Pope's visit to Canada. Have a great weekend.